to open today's conversation, government agencies are being asked to do more with less all the time. And so, from your experience, what's shifting the most and how agencies define success today?
This is both an old problem and a new problem. And we talk about transparency and trust. The old problem is it was easy to put together something that had a quote unquote public agenda. This is the reason why we're going to take it to a governing board and get it approved. But a lot of times you'd have these unspoken agendas. This is something that the city manager wants to do or what the mayor wants to do. And they'll say, I want this, but really it's because I want to get this. And the problem is dealing with transparency and trust. You're going to have to deal with this unspoken piece at some point because someone usually figures it out. The second piece is if you're not tying this project to some successful goal that you've well defined, how do you define success, and how is your citizen base going to define success as to what they got for the money? So it's not that there's things going on in the back room that are devious or anything like that, but I had a mayor once who wanted to encourage and vastly grow online participation in public meetings. He's like, we need to be able to have outreach to all of our citizens. What he would tell me privately, it's because I would rather have them send questions online than show up to a public meeting and take all the oxygen out of the room. That was his real agenda for doing that. That's why he wanted to do that. So the problem is, like I said, someone eventually will figure that out. And so you really need to make sure you're aligning this with real goals, especially when it comes to the overall vision of your governing body, because this is how you get sustainable funding. So it's interesting how that continues to shift. Like I said, there's almost like there's no place to hide anymore. You have to be transparent, and you have to demonstrate that you're trustworthy to get a lot of this done, especially long term.
Yeah, and how do we help our clients navigate that? How do we help them define what success means? How do we help them break through all of the politics and all the noise of all the wants, right, of each department?
Yeah, and it's going in there immediately and tying it to a particular vision or a particular initiative. I like to look at what the city council goals are. What have they defined that they want to do during their 2 or 3 year term or whatever their term is? Because the only way you're going to get the sustainable funding, especially on replacing a system where there's recurring costs every year, or there's a replacement cost several years down the road, or that's getting less and less likely because we're not dealing with hardware. Tie this to an overall vision. We're really good at that, being able to go to executive level or even governing board level. And this is what the project is. This is what it means to you. This is what it's going to look like for you in 2 or 3 years. In some cases, explaining to them, you're going to look wildly successful as a governing body or as a mayor by replacing something like this with something that's a little more proactive, something that's a little more tactical, so it can grow with your organization if your organization's growing quickly. And just tying it to a vision. It's the easiest way, whether I'm meeting internally with people in my organization or I'm meeting with the mayor or a governing body or a steering committee. It's the same old principle. If I tie it to an overall vision, an overall outcome, then suddenly everyone sees how it all aligns and how it feeds that. If you don't have the overall vision, it looks like you've got all these segmented pieces trying to work in parallel, and you don't see the actual outcome and the true vision.
Right. Can you give us an example of what overall vision would be for a city or county?
Yeah, I can. The one that comes to mind is the one that I experienced when I was in local government, which is I had a mayor that said, I want us to be the leader in public safety technology. And he distilled that down after a little bit of questioning to, I want people who are criminals to know that if you come into my town, I'm going to get a picture of your license plate and we're going to find you. And I want my citizens to feel that there's a palpable difference and an improvement in the techniques we're doing for solving crime. And that was great, because then the next thing he said was, here's $3 million, go figure it out. So a dream situation. But I had that vision. I knew what his outcome was. And I knew that at the end of that $3 million in that 18-month timeline, it had to have that. It had to be palpable. He had to have a reason to go publicly and say, you come into the town, we have license plate readers, we're going to get a picture of your license plate. And everything else will fall into place behind that. I know when he wanted to be able to say that. I knew when he was going to be able to tolerate delays in the projects or shifting expectations, things like that. And I can unite behind that entire vision. And so even though 18 months was an insane timeline to be able to do all that in, we got it done because I had the full support of the council and leadership at the town by showing them on a monthly basis, this is where we're going. This will be done this particular month. This will be done the following month, keeping things on track. And they were like, great, it's exactly what we're looking for. Go take care of the details and come back next month.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that, Robert. And I love your background and your story of how you got to Avero. So can you just remind our viewers where you came from and how you got here and why that particular vision is so key to what we do now?
Yeah, so I actually started off in state government when I was in college, and they were gracious enough to hire me as a full-time employee. When I graduated college, in information technology, which is a majority of my base, information technology and project planning, actually in state and local government. Went to a private sector architecture firm for 2 years, which was a growing organization, a growing firm that was big on mission, vision, values. I got a real good taste as to what that looks like, and it was a great contrast to what I experienced in government. Went back into local government, working for a town in the Phoenix area in information technology. And as the town grew and its needs changed, and it went from being sort of lost in the Stone Age a little bit, I guess is a nice way to say it, but it's with the type of community that was okay at that time, starting in like 2008, 2009, when funding issues were significant, especially in local government. They were cutting staff left and right, and you now had to maximize all your purchases over the next 2 or 3 years. And things started to leapfrog over themselves in terms of the possibilities of technology. So it's a very interesting time, and did that for quite a while. And happened to have this guy named AV come in on a shortlist presentation for an IT strategic plan, and he did a pretty good job. And we actually hired him, and so that's how AV, our CEO, and I knew each other. So, many years later, he gives me a call and he says, "Do you want to come do this?" And it's yeah. I saw the vision of I finally could be the consultant I was always looking for when I was on the other side of the table. It's the way I describe it. My heart still is very much in local government. Now I get to serve 25, 30 local and state government entities across the board. So what drives me and gets me excited about all this, I still get to be involved in, but from this side of the table, and in a way that I can help my clients more by, again, being the consultant that I was always trying to look for when I was putting out RFPs and interviewing vendors.
I love that. And our founder and CEO, Mr. Avijit Varakar, can be very, very persuasive. So I get it, but I love that story. And I think it, makes a real impact that you have lived it. Right. And now you're on the other side of the table. So thank you for sharing that, Robert. And I think this is a good segue into my next question, in which, a lot of public agencies, they partner with vendors, and that partnership becomes more transactional instead of relationship based. So how do you turn a transactional relationship into more of one that adds long-term value?
It's the same thing. You'll hear me repeat myself from other times we discussed this topic, but it really is, it's trust. And it really comes down to shared fate. If
It does.
transactional means there's certain rules, and there's also areas, and it also implies limitation of liability by both parties. So everything's very strictly defined. It's within a narrow framework, not just because that's what people love to do. It's because I'm trying to control liability in dealing with this person. If I reach out to this vendor and I ask this, they're going to smell change order, and I'm going to suddenly get a sales presentation from them. And all I literally wanted to do was ask a question and get some clarity.
Mhm.
When you remove those barriers and it's a trusting relationship and they know that you're in it with them, all those walls come down and honest conversations could be had. Rather than spending 5 minutes trying to set up and frame the meeting, give me a call, answer the phone. You tell me exactly what you're looking for. Hey, I was just thinking about this. Can you give me some insight on that? And then that way, that it really is a trusting collaboration, and that neither party suddenly thinks about, oh, if I ask this question, is it going to cause them to think this? All those sorts of stuff that goes away when you actually have some sort of collaborative relationship, which is why we're big on relationships here at Avero, because unless people are willing to sit down and be honest and look at a situation and be direct about it, it's very difficult to solve issues. It's very difficult to solve challenges. And the unspoken things that a client doesn't want to tell me is a problem, because that's a festering problem that I can't address unless I know about it. So that's why the trust aspect, the communication aspect, the shared fate aspect is just so important with clients. There's just no substitute for really getting down to what the issues are and getting them solved quickly.